Ok, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bonsoir à tous. Good evening to everyone. I'm Bertrand Buchwalter. I'm the director of the Institut Français in the United Kingdom. And I'm delighted to welcome you tonight for this event. The first event face-to-face in real life, I'd say, for many months now. And we are delighted. And we are thrilled to welcome you back at the Institute. It's been too long, and we missed you immensely. And thank you for being with us tonight. It is comforting to see so many of you tonight with us. And we have also lots of people joining us online. And we'll have these events ongoing this week. Matthias will get into this like in a minute in a hybrid fashion, online and on site. But after the very enduring months that we have lived, it is great to be back here at the Institute, to be back with the public. And we are very excited to that the reopening of the Institute coincides with the launch of the Beyond Words Festival, which has been a long-standing festival. We thank you also for your support, which made this festival possible. But without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Matthias, who will talk about the event tonight and about also Beyond Words in Matthias.
Thank you, Bertrand. My name is Matthias Rambaud, and I work as the head of the book department here at the French Institute. Every year for the past 5 years, the Beyond Words Festival has been dedicated to highlighting the best of contemporary French literature in English translation and to promoting dialogue between French and British writers. This year, due to the circumstances, it will be in hybrid format with speakers and audiences both online and on-site. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank the writers for accepting our invitation and you, the audience, for returning to this more traditional mode of cultural event. I'd like to thank our partner, the French bookshop La Librairie La Page, who is here with us to sell books. And tonight we have the pleasure and honor of welcoming 4 very talented young artists. Julia Kerninon, who is a French writer. She's with us online from Nantes in France. Her first novel, Buvard, won the Prix Françoise Sagan. A second novel, Le Dernier Amour d'Attila Kiss, won the Prix de la Closerie des Lilas in 2016. And her latest novel, My Devotion, is the winner of the 2018 Fénéon Literary Prize. My Devotion was translated into English by Alison Anderson and published by Europa. And Julia Kerninon is also the author of a remarkable writer's memoir. I think the technical term is biblio-autobiography. Anyway, a remarkable little book entitled A Respectable Occupation, translated into English by Rose Diver, published by The Fugitive, with a foreword by Lauren Elkin. Here with us is also Rebecca Watson, a British writer and the author of an acclaimed first novel, Little Scratch, a kind of Molly Bloom's monologue 2.0, published by Faber and masterfully translated into French by Julia Kerninon as Sous la peau by Grasset. Rebecca's work has been published in the Times Literary Supplement and The Guardian and Granta, among others. And in 2018, she was shortlisted for the White Review Short Story Prize. Here with us is also Olivia Ross, who is a British actress born in Paris. She started her career at the Shakespeare Globe Theatre and has since performed in award-winning shows such as Killing Eve and War and Peace. And in France, she has an extended career working for Auteur Cinéma with award-winning directors such as Olivier Assayas or Mia Hansen-Løve. And last but not least, Lauren Elkin will share this conversation. Lauren is from New York. She's a writer, a translator, a critic, an academic, and she's the author of Flâneuses, Women Walk the City, which was one of the New York Times notable 100 books of 2017. And in September, she will publish a book with a very Peruvian title, number 9192, A Diary of a Year on the Bus, published by The Fugitive, as well as a translation of Simone de Beauvoir's novel Les Mandarins for Vintage Classic. In her foreword for A Respectable Occupation, Julia's book, Lauren writes, "If you sell books, you're a bookseller. If you unblock drains, you're a plumber. If you practice law, you're a lawyer. But how do you give yourself permission to call yourself a writer, even after writing your own life, even after giving up material comforts in order to do it?" Well, let's find out, shall we?
Thank you, Matthias, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being with us in person and online. Julia here from Nantes, and all the other people who I don't know who you are, but thank you for joining us. This is such a thrill. I mean, not even Stephen Colbert is back in the studio. So the fact that we can be here together, I'm not as funny as he is, but, you know, we'll do what we can. So thank you, everyone here, for being with us. And, you know, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Julia. This is really such a thrill. So yeah, I had the honor of writing an introduction to Julia's book for Les Fugitives, whose editor, Cécile, is with us tonight. And Julia translated Rebecca's book, and I haven't written any forewords for Rebecca's work or translated it, but, you know, I know her and I like her work, and I've, you know, been very excited to talk to her for a while now. So there's a nice, you know, kind of synchronicity going on here. But so Matthias, in quoting from my introduction to Julia's book, sort of set up exactly the question that I wanted to pose to these two fresh young voices with strong stances. How do you go from a place of being maybe not so strong in your stance and not so convinced of the freshness of your voice? How do you give yourself permission to write and to put that writing out into the world and to say, you know, maybe people would be interested in hearing what I have to say? So I'm going to point it first to Julia, because she's been waiting so patiently in France, and because she wrote the book about this lovely, possibly respectable occupation that is writing. And then we'll bring in Rebecca. So Julia, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. I have to admit, I never felt like I had to give myself any permission to write, as I tell it in the book, the memoir. I've always been writing. So I started writing when I was a little girl, and then time went on and there was nothing to stop me. So I found myself like 20 years old still writing, which sounded sometimes like something wonderful and sometimes just like I'm an obsessional type of person. So I don't know. I think something that made me feel stronger was the fact that I did a PhD in American literature, and also spent so many time reading and writing that at the end, somewhere around maybe 25 or 27, I published my first novel, I felt sort of, would you say legitimacy? Would that be right in English?
Legitimacy, yeah.
Yeah, this is it. So that was it, like time and work, and obviously a sort of naivete.
Yeah, and Rebecca.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just lying to yourself. It's kind of, you just allow yourself to perform, and, you know, pretend that you are a writer, and then suddenly it happens and you are, and you're like, oh, I fooled them. I think with writing Little Scratch, I kind of had the fortune of, it's, you know, it's formally quite different, and so I felt like I was creating something on the page that was my own. And so I think by having my own kind of space and using that and kind of devising a system, I kind of escaped comparison. I didn't feel like I was writing alongside other people. I felt like I was doing my thing. And so all I was asking myself was, you know, have I done this the way that I envisaged it? And that was the challenge. That was it.
So how then, I mean, I don't know if everyone here has seen what Little Scratch looks like on the page, and Olivia is going to read from it in a little bit. But it's
Thank you,
highly
Julia.
formally inventive, I think is the official term for it. Ah, yes, thank you. And yeah, so I wonder how I want to keep talking about this notion of legitimacy and doing a PhD and the connection between reading and writing. But just to stay with this a little bit, because it is such a unique way to write a book, and especially to come out of the gate with your first book. How did this form come to you?
It's a good question, and I often find myself pretending that I remember the moment that it happened, because now to me, I know that structure so well, and it's so intuitive that I kind of wonder where it actually came from. But I mean, I remember the kind of moment where I was starting to think about I guess the main thing is that it's about immediacy. It's in a single moment. How do you authentically convey every single thing that's going on? So we take this moment right now, where I'm talking to you and I'm aware of kind of these cameras around and seeing my face and this kind of slightly absurd situation of people wearing masks and all these other things, whilst also trying to just like say sentences that make sense. And so that is, 10 seconds of a moment, and yet there is so much going on. And to convey that to a reader, you have to wait for them to get to the end of a paragraph or the end of a sentence. And so I was frustrated by that kind of disingenuous way in which the page represents the moment. And so I kind of essentially wanted, as you traveled down the page, to pass through time. And so that kind of made me kind of break it into columns, to kind of have those competing forces on the page. And it really was that moment of just by asking myself the question and that kind of moment of tension on the page just made me break it up. And that was, where it started from.
I mean, it reads incredibly intuitively, as you say it. You look, maybe if you look at it on the page before you actually dive in, it might look maybe daunting. I don't know, if you're not accustomed to reading that kind of material. Maybe it looks, just looking at it, it looks more like poetry than a novel. But it does, if you are used to being a human in the world, as I think we all are at this point, then it does read just like, oh yes, exactly, yeah, that's what it's like. We're doing this thing, and this is the official narrative of what's happening. But inside, you've got your interior monologue that's doing all sorts of different things and going all sorts of different places. I, for one, am hoping that my partner and child do not FaceTime me in the middle of the event, because I forgot to turn my phone off. So they might, and that'll be very exciting if it happens, because then you'll remember I told you this. But anyway, so I want to then hit the pause button on this and come back to this, because I'm still not, and come back to Julia and come back to this sort of at the same time, because I'm still not quite there at understanding how either of you came to feel that you had the right to speak on the page. So Julia, I'm coming back to you again. You spoke about legitimacy, possibly stemming from the fact that you did a PhD, and I did a PhD as well, and can say that in my own writing, I sometimes feel that they're fighting each other. The way that I was trained to think and write as an academic, I think that we have all of our training was in France and in études anglophones. I think we know a lot of the same people.
Yeah, this is it.
But and especially in France, you're just trained in a very specific kind of way to write about texts. So I wonder how, I mean, just to start somewhere, how did you come to publish your first book?
Actually, my first book is not the one you're thinking about. I think the first book I really published was when I was 20 years old, and it was at a young literature publisher. It was called Adieu la chair, which is the right translation for carnival. Carnival is, carnevale. So it was Adieu la chair, la bye bye flesh. That was when I was 20, but I was under a pseudonym because I didn't want to publish young literature, but they thought I was young literature because I was young, actually. And then I published another one when I was 22. That happened by sort of accident. There was that guy who was a publisher, and he wanted to find new voices, fresh voices. So he went to, go around the slam poetry movement in Paris. And I was still living in Nantes, but I was into that slam poetry movement since I was 15 years old. and I think I was sort of the younger. And so he went in Paris and he asked the people, "Do you have any novel, in your drawer?" And they were like, "No, but there is this young girl in Nantes who I think has something." So he called me and I say, "Yeah, I have something," and that's how I got published in the first place. And then time went by, and I wrote what would be my real first novel under my real name, Buvard. So I sent it to him, but he could not publish it because that was not a young people novel anyway. And that was it. And I sent it to many publishers and didn't know who they were actually, because I always been reading only um, American or English literature. I'm a fake French in a way, so I know nothing about French literature. So I always feel like dumb when people speak about that. And then the book got published that way. But I don't know. You speak about giving ourselves the right to, and maybe this is something that I really loved in Rebecca's novel, is the fact that she's bold, or at least her narrator is bold. But I don't know if you can imagine boldness if you're not at all bold yourself. And I don't know. I understand the idea of wondering if one is up to something, but then isn't it really a woman's subject to be bold and not ask oneself if we have the right to do things, but just do it? Like, do men ask themselves whether they have the right or not? Obviously not most of the time.
I think that's very true. I was reminded as I was prepping for this event of this passage. I was not long ago reading Heather Clark's new Sylvia Plath biography, and she lingers for quite a while on the way that people around Sylvia Plath, when she was a student at Smith College, and then later when she was doing work at Cambridge on a Fulbright, the way that the people around her responded to her professionalism, because she was constantly sending out stories to magazines, and she would, talk to people and say, like, how do you think I can write a story that would make me a lot of money? Like, she really, she came from a background where she, was not very well off. Her mother worked herself to the bone trying to support her family and trying to, live up to help her children have the kind of life that she wanted for them. And so, yeah, the kind of reaction, especially when she got to Cambridge and was this like flashy American, wearing very loud clothes and had bright blonde hair, and was very direct and very ambitious. She was treated as a careerist rather than a professional. So this, when we say like, no, we don't ask men to ask, or we don't expect men to ask permission, but we are thinking in the context of this conversation as it being a permission-giving thing. I can't help thinking about that distinction. I wonder, Rebecca, if that's something that you've encountered at all in your own kind of coming up as a writer.
Not that I can say on record. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still young. I mean, I'm just turned 26, so I think that yeah, I've had to have some of that boldness. And I think the fact that this book has been published and it's all happened, I haven't really had to have that struggle yet. And I think I had this vision for the book, and so I decided to do it, and I made it happen. And I wrote with a real kind of fire, and it was a very quick process. And I think a lot of that was just basically ignoring anyone else who tried to get in the way, and just not really allowing that to be a thing. Yeah.
And so what was the process like of getting Little Scratch into the world?
Well, very magical, to be honest. So the first thing I wrote, Little Scratch, was a short story, which ended up being, I guess, the middle of the book, the lunch break of the book. And that I submitted that to a prize, and it got shortlisted, and then my agent took me on after that, and she basically just said, "I'll just wait for you to finish the book." So I was like, great. So then I just spent the rest of that, this was at the beginning of 2018, and I spent the rest of the year writing it, and then it was really just like writing every day, and I just knew that I was going to get it done. I knew that I really thought by the end of the year it would happen. It did. And I sent it to my agent, and, it sold a week later. So it was just this kind of freak, unexpected, very fortunate process. So yeah, as I say, like I haven't had the moment where I've had to question too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that I don't know, I feel kind of two-minded about the question of, young women giving themselves permission to be writers, because yes, it is true that you can seize the day, and sometimes things come from us in miraculous, they just flow. But I think that it's so important to recognize how our circumstances really can put us in such a position that we can meet the right people and have our work seen by the right people. I don't mean to sound moralizing. It's just, this is, especially in publishing right now, I think there's a real reckoning going on to try to understand how some voices are heard and others are not. And we're three young middle-class white women sitting up here, having this conversation. So it feels kind of urgent to recognize, the way that our milieu and our education sort of put us in a place where we could be read, and not have to insist so dramatically on being heard. But so maybe that's a good moment to kind of break off our conversation and invite Olivia to come up and share some of Julia's texts in English and in French with us. So thank you, Olivia.
Je suis retournée vivre à Budapest il y a 5 ans, dans un nouvel appartement, de l'autre côté du fleuve cette fois, à Buda, au 6e et dernier étage d'un immeuble jaune de la rue Attila. J'y ai passé 6 mois, à lire, à nager à la piscine en plein air du stade Chazar comme jadis, manger des haricots en paprika, en conserve, babysitter les 2 petites filles d'une richissime femme d'affaires dans le secteur cosmétique, dont l'appartement dominait la ville du haut d'une colline très chic, que je gravissais en fin de journée à bord d'un genre de funiculaire, naviguant à vue, à travers les branches verdoyantes des arbres. Et le soir, les mains couvertes de traces de feutre ou de pâte à tarte, je rentrais chez moi en taxi. Et je mettais les derniers mots, qui étaient aussi les plus importants, à ce roman, dont j'avais écrit la version initiale au cours de ma première année passée dans cette ville, et dont la parution 2 ans plus tard bouleverserait tout pour moi. J'écrivais presque un chapitre par jour. Jamais écrire n'avait été aussi évident, aussi facile. Comme si, après avoir écrit durant des années, j'étais subitement récompensée. J'apprenais sans cesse de nouvelles choses, à faire des dialogues, à faire des conclusions, des virages. C'était incroyable. Ma vie était minimaliste. Elle tenait dans une valise. Et j'étais très heureuse. 2 mois après mes 25 ans, il est tombé 30 bons centimètres de neige. Et à des kilomètres de là, ma grand-mère paternelle est morte dans son sommeil. Et à peine quelques jours plus tard, scandaleusement, indécemment, j'ai pensé tomber amoureuse. C'est dans cet état-là que j'écrivais toutes les nuits, assise en tailleur, dans un large fauteuil beige enfoncé dans un coin près de la fenêtre. J'aimais vraiment écrire à cet endroit. J'y ai passé beaucoup de temps et fini un roman. Mais je me rappelle aussi avoir fait du bon travail autrefois, collé contre un radiateur tout un hiver dans le Black Country en Angleterre, dans une maison de style géorgien glacial, dont l'ancienneté interdisait de remédier à l'isolation défaillante, et sur le perron de laquelle les putes de la rue s'asseyaient immanquablement pour papoter, entre 2 shifts, comme disait ma colocataire albanaise Odetta, qui m'a aussi confié cette phrase poignante et mystérieuse que je n'ai jamais oubliée. Personne ne nous rend la liberté qu'on lui a abandonnée. Nous l'appelions tous Odé. Je l'aimais beaucoup. Elle était brillante et dure et écrivait d'extraordinaires poèmes saccadés, tandis que dans une autre chambre, une autre poétesse écrivait également, Helen, qui publierait plus tard un recueil étincelant, alors que son petit ami de l'époque peignait inlassablement dans une pièce orientée face au jardin, en portant tous ses vêtements les uns sur les autres, surmontés d'un pochon pour combattre le froid terrible des Midlands en hiver. Moi, adossée au radiateur de ma chambre, j'ai écrit un livre dans mon lit cet hiver-là. Comme plus tard, j'ai écrit aussi sur un sofa, baigné de soleil à Rome, lorsque, avec une fille que je connaissais à peine, nous avions décidé de laisser tomber les hommes au profit du vin italien. Et aussi avant, dans un petit café avec véranda, au bord du Landwehrkanal à Berlin, quand je vivais au 7 May Barufer. Une année houleuse durant laquelle mon colocataire Alcacer, un ex-amant apprenti réalisateur avec qui je me disputais tous les jours, mais sous la verrière du café Condé, qui aujourd'hui n'existe plus, pas plus que le Berlin que j'ai connu, j'ai parfois écrit de très bonnes pages. Et aussi la nuit, quand je prenais du speed 4 jours d'affilée pour corriger un manuscrit entier et qu'Alcacer venait frapper à ma porte tous les matins en se réveillant pour me dire quel jour on était maintenant. Et même aussi dans le 2 pièces dévasté que j'ai loué l'année suivante à Nantes, quand une immense partie de ma vie s'était écroulée, au point que j'accepte de revenir là d'où j'étais partie. I went back to live in Budapest 5 years ago, in a new apartment, on the other side of the river this time, in Buda, on the 6th and top floor of a yellow building in Attila Street. I spent 6 months there, reading, going swimming in the open-air pool of the Shazar Komjadi Sports Center, eating tin beans in paprika sauce, and babysitting the 2 little girls of a super wealthy businesswoman in the cosmetics industry, whose apartment dominated the city from the top of an elegant hill, which I ascended at the end of the day in a kind of cable car, blindly making its way through the verdant boughs of trees. And later in the evening, my hands covered in pastry dough or ink stains from felt pens, I would go home in a taxi and put the last words, the most important words, to the novel I had written the first draft of during the year I spent here in the city, and whose publication 2 years later would change everything for me. I wrote almost a chapter a day. Never had writing seemed so obvious, so easy, as if I was continually learning new things. How to write dialogues, how to create endings, plot twists. It was incredible. My life was minimalistic. It fit into a suitcase, and I was very happy. 2 months after I turned 25, a good 30 centimeters of snow fell. And miles away, my paternal grandmother died in her sleep. And barely a few days later, scandalously, indecently, I decided to fall in love. It was in that strange state that I wrote all night, sitting cross-legged in a wide beige armchair stuck in a corner by the window. I really loved writing in that spot. I spent a lot of time there and I finished a novel. But I also remember having written good work long ago, glued to a radiator for a whole winter in the Black Country in England, in a freezing Georgian house whose age made it impossible to fix the failing insulation, and on whose front steps the local street whores would always sit to gossip between 2 shifts. As my Albanian flatmate Odetta would say, the one who gave me this poignant and mysterious quote saying, which I have never forgotten, "No one gives back the freedom you've given away to them." We called her Ode. I liked her a lot. She was brilliant and hard and wrote extraordinary jolting poems, while another poet, Helen, also wrote in another room and would later publish a sparkling collection. And while her boyfriend at the time painted continuously in a little room facing the garden, wearing all of his clothes on top of each other, covered by a poncho to fight off the terrible cold of the Midlands in February. I wrote a book in bed that winter, leaning back against the radiator in my room, just as I later wrote on a sofa, bathed in sunlight in Rome, where I, together with a girl I hardly knew, decided to give up on men for Italian wine. And also before that, in a little cafe with a veranda on the banks of the Landwehrkanal in Berlin, when I was living at number 7 May Barufa. A stormy year. When my flatmate Al-Kaisa was an ex-lover and apprentice director with whom I had rows every day. But under the glass roof of the Café Condé that no longer exists, just like the Berlin I knew, I sometimes wrote good pages. And also at night, when I took speed for 4 days straight to edit a whole manuscript, and Al-Kaisa would come and knock on my door every morning when he woke up to tell me what day it is today. And even in the ruined one-bedroom apartment I rented the following year in Nantes, when an enormous part of my life had fallen apart to the point that I accepted returning to where I had started out.
Thank you, Olivia. I will wait for Julia to come back up. Is she there? Is it working? Hello.
Hey there.
I'm so sorry you can't be here with us. It's really wonderful to hear your work read, and
Yeah,
we
it
all wish
is.
you could be here. We're all thinking of you. Everyone was just rapt listening to Olivia. That was beautiful. So the sections that Olivia read really highlight for me one of the pleasures of your book, which is that it has this, well, you have this way, and thus the book does too, of kind of drifting from city to city and country to country, and it's very bohemian and very inspiring and very textured. And so you write somewhere in the book, and I quoted this in the introduction, that all you wanted really in life was a place to write, enough money to feed your children, enough time to love, and to have absolutely no one making decisions in your stead. So there's that, that fits this kind of bohemian worldview. But you also write about the very hard work, often involving, ooh, you're frozen. I hope you can still hear me. Often involving menial labor, which makes that dream life possible. Do we still have Julia? Yeah. Did you hear? Hi. Sorry. Did you hear what I asked?
No, you just came back.
Sorry. I was just talking about the way that you write very importantly about how inspiring it can be to live in different places and to, have very modest aims in terms of what you want to accomplish materially with your work and your life. But you also write about the very hard work and sometimes menial labor that is necessary to support that dream life. I wonder if you could say a bit about that tension.
Well, there will be many things to say. First, I don't think it is that modest to hope for time to write, money to have kids, and to choose who I love and everything. It's not that easy, is it? But it ended up that way, actually. And also, yes, I think I was quite lost when I was 20 because I wanted to be a writer, but I knew that I was not rock and roll enough. The model roles of writers are usually men, alcoholics. That's what my PhD thesis is about, actually, a dissertation. And it was hard to carve a writer's model that could fit me, who was, very obeying, not country girl, but not Parisian girls. So I was wondering how to do that. And yeah, I worked as a waitress for many years in the summers, and somehow it fitted the legend of the writer who's supposed to have had many little jobs like selling candies and everything. But actually, it was much more than that. It taught me something about effort, obviously, but also something about being with people. I think that the social tricks that I've got by being a waitress are the same that allow me now to find my way in literary circles. Anyhow, I mean, I don't live in Paris, obviously, so I'm not going to the supposed cocktail parties and everything that are not happening actually. But I don't know. It gave me a sort of social fluidity that that reveals itself to be very useful. I think that sometimes people ask, what does it take to be a writer? And my first answer is always, first, you have to be able to sit for 6 hours straight, because that's something. Or you have to be able to be on your own. People would say, you need to have imagination. And That comes second. You don't need that. You have to be able to work by yourself. You have to find pleasure in solitude. And I think that all the other skills, the social skills, are very helpful too. The capacity to connect with people, to sort of not network because that's a dirty word, but understand what you can do and where you can go, and be a nice lad also.
Thank you. And so, Rebecca, in your novel, your narrator wants to be a writer, it seems, but she's having some trouble. And I'll let you decide how much you want to say about that. But yeah, there does seem to be this tension there as well between the day job, the desk job, which she kind of loathes. But again, I'll let you talk about that. And the writing dream, which maybe is elusive.
Yeah. So it is a kind of tension. I mean, so the protagonist has been assaulted, and the place of the assault is the workplace. So the workplace becomes a kind of very charged place because it's both a tension in terms of she can't write because she's, I mean, obviously she can write because I wrote around a full-time job, but it's, it gets in the way. And so that's already a tension. But then obviously with the person who's there and who's done it is around, then it becomes a kind of, it's this huge psychological block for her. And I think that the book kind of talks about the difference between, I guess, like creative space and spaces that kind of suppress your creativity. And for her, those things really fuse together. And it's also, I guess, about because she has this psychological block of the assault, that essentially stops her from being able to write. And so I think a lot of it is about I guess being like honest with yourself. And if you're unable to comprehend something that's going on in your life, then how are you going to sit down and allow yourself to write? There's a kind of strange block there. I completely agree, by the way, of what Julia was saying about waitressing and solitude and all of those things. I think that's so true. And I think like working in hospitality and the kind of performance that you learn from that is actually, I've always thought, so vital for writing. And essentially that's a kind of form of, it's a performance, isn't it? And so going between those two things of being face on and presenting yourself and then going home and being alone feels like the kind of perfect analogy for the ways in which you kind of exist as a writer in a public space and you write as a kind of personal thing.
Yeah, and your book really beautifully and honestly kind of navigates those divides between the public and the private, or even just the private realm of the mind, even when in the public space of the office. I love that middle section where she has her lunch break and she's like, please let my sofa that I like to have lunch at be free, just to kind of create her own little zone where she can be without being on or performing. I was, as someone who's thinks a lot about modernist literature and specifically the experiments of now 100 years ago. Obviously, I was thinking a lot about Ulysses or Mrs. Dalloway as precursors for your book because they, it takes place in the course of one day from beginning to end, and so does Little Scratch. There's some toilet moments in Joyce and in Watson.
Quite a few toilet moments.
Yeah. And so I wondered how you were thinking about the relationship, between the, how to say this, there's so much honesty in the book in terms of like our bodily realities, and there's a kind of tension in the kind of temporal space of the book between, I don't know, a narrative that is engaging to read, and that's there is a kind of there is a line. There is not just like, and then she does this and then she does this, and then there's something that she's kind of working through in her mind. So I guess how did you think about that relationship between we're so much in her mind and then we're also so much in her body, and how did you work that out over the space of this one day long kind of story?
Well, I guess in Little Scratch, the drama of the book becomes the passing of time. It's the kind of tension of, will she get through the day? And that should be a question that the answer is obvious to, and yet within this book that certainly becomes the kind of propulsion, is you actually, I guess the reader has to inhabit the book as the protagonist. You read her thoughts, the way in which she perceives the world, so you are essentially living that day for her. And so the kind of physicality of the world, the space that she inhabits, the things that she does, whether it's like going to the toilet, eating her lunch, walking from her desk to refill her water bottle, these kind of, very ordinary moments become actually very charged, because for each moment of activity is a kind of thought process. And I guess the connection to like modernism is both. I think my connection to like reading Woolf mainly actually is, I think that the ambition is to try and honestly convey the act of existing. Like, what is true experience? How do people actually think? How do people actually work through a day? And so I think from very early on in writing Little Scratch, I knew the thing that I was setting myself was I couldn't skip anything. I couldn't kind of write these gleaming moments of profundity without quite a lot of the ordinary moments of the day. And those, I guess, like, the kind of paces, I think, and this connected to the whole point of the book, which is talking about a soul, and a victim of trauma doesn't just exist within the climaxes. So it doesn't just exist in the moment of, the act of assault. They exist through these kind of ordinary days, exist during these ordinary moments. And actually, I wanted to look at, those moments of pace before and after the intensity.
Yeah, it's such a feat of narrative to fill in the gaps between, things happening. Like, even if it's just like someone making the protagonist some tea, and then, what she does after that. It's really, it's hard even for me to talk about, because it feels like such an interior experience of reading that even just pulling out themes or, I don't know, anything more conventional than that feels like a kind of overdetermination of the text, if that makes any sense. So maybe it's best if we invite Olivia back to read so you can all see a bit of what I'm talking about.
Wondering the difference between a woman saying, "nice shoes," a woman I do not know very well at all, no, and a man I do not know very well at all, saying, "nice shoes." I guess if a man says, a certain sort of man, that is, I can't say for sure, I can't tell you how to know, just that you'll know when you know that it's that sort of man. Yes, when that sort of man says, "nice shoes," he's not saying, "nice shoes." He is saying, "I am itemizing you." He is saying, "Take yourself out of that head and put your eyes in my sockets because, hello, I am itemizing you." Like yesterday, that man wrapping the side of his stand, selling caramel nuts, me sitting nearby, propped by the side of the river 10 minutes before I needed to go back to my desk, reading, and then him suddenly wrapping the side, wrap, wrap, wrap. Me, head down, ignoring, him wrapping the side, me looking up and beaming at me. Nothing more, just wanting to grin, to show his presence when I was finally for a moment not present anywhere. What are those moments called? Some would call them niceties, I guess, but I just hear the knock against the side of his stand, with his fist clenched, needing me to notice, to be interrupted, to give the attention I was so set on giving elsewhere. I know, if I told this anecdote, I'd stress the nuance. If I were to tell my him about it, as I often end up doing, telling that is, although not other things, but this digression is not something I am going into, I'd embellish. I'd say, he looked me up and down, or he said, whoa, I like a bit of that, adding any detail to support my side so there's no chance he'd doubt, no chance he'd say, well, what's wrong with a man wanting to smile at you on a sunny day? The answer is obviously a lot. A lot is wrong with that. But I don't have the words. I can't unpick right now. No words, just lines. Je me demande quelle est la différence entre une femme disant « jolies chaussures », une femme que je ne connais pas très bien du tout, non, et un homme que je ne connais pas très bien non plus, disant « jolies chaussures ». Je suppose que si un homme dit, c'est-à-dire un certain genre d'homme, je ne peux pas certifier, je ne peux pas expliquer comment on sait, juste qu'on sait, quand c'est le cas, que c'est ce genre d'homme, quand ce genre d'homme dit « jolies chaussures », il ne dit pas « jolies chaussures ». Ce qu'il dit, c'est « je te déshabille du regard ». Ce qu'il dit, c'est « sors de tes pensées et regarde-moi parce que, salut, je te déshabille du regard ». Comme hier, cet homme tapotant contre la paroi de son stand de noix au caramel, et moi assise à côté, allongée le long de la rivière, 10 minutes avant de devoir retourner au bureau. J'étais occupée à lire, et puis, lui, soudain, tapotant contre la paroi du stand, tap, tap, tap. Moi qui l'ignore, la tête baissée, lui tapotant contre la paroi, moi levant la tête et lui m'adressant un large sourire. Rien de plus. Il voulait juste me sourire pour me signaler sa présence, alors que l'espace d'un instant, je m'étais enfin absentée du monde. Comment appelle-t-on ce genre de moment ? Je suppose qu'on pourrait appeler ça des contacts humains, mais j'entends simplement le choc de son poing, fermé, contre la paroi de son stand, son besoin que je le remarque, que je m'interrompe, que je lui accorde l'attention que j'étais si déterminée à consacrer à autre chose. Je sais que si je devais raconter cette anecdote, je soulignerais la nuance. Si je devais la raconter à mon lui, comme je finis souvent par le faire, raconter, je veux dire, même s'il y a d'autres choses dont je ne parle pas, mais je ne vais pas me lancer dans cette digression maintenant, j'embellirais les choses. Je dirais « il m'a maté du haut en bas » ou « il m'a lancé un « mate un peu ça ». J'ajouterais n'importe quel détail pour me défendre ma cause de façon à ce qu'il ne puisse pas douter, ne puisse pas dire « mais qu'est-ce qu'il y a de mal à ce qu'un homme veuille te sourire par une belle journée ?» La réponse est manifestement beaucoup de choses. Il y a beaucoup de choses qui ne vont pas avec ça. Mais je n'ai pas les mots. Je ne peux pas décortiquer tout ça maintenant. Je n'ai pas de mots. Je n'ai que des répliques.
Thank you. So I would love to keep talking, especially about that passage, but I am aware that we are coming to the end of our time together. So I would like very much to open up the discussion to the audience if there are any questions that you're all burning to ask. We're not doing online questions, I assume, or are we? If there's like a chat function. Okay. So, hello, physical audience. Do you have any physical questions? Yeah. Do Okay, got it. Great.
The question was about the two translations that you heard. I don't remember if the first one from Julia's extract was translated by herself or not. I thought it was very interesting to hear the two side by side, because obviously, from what I picked from the translation, it's both were very efficient. I think in terms of meaning, in terms of feeling, the job is done.
Sorry, let me just say what you just said. So you were saying that you thought that the first translation of Julia's work was very efficient and well done. Oh, both. Okay. No, it was someone called Alison Anderson.
And so both to me are very efficient in conveying the meaning and the feeling that you get from this extract.
They're both very efficient in conveying the meaning that you get from the extract.
And at the same time, there are a few examples where obviously there's a choice
And so in each there were choices, there were moments where there were important choices to be made.
And not necessarily all the time maybe the literal translation.
And we're not always opting for the literal translation. Sorry, it's just easier this way.
And I was wondering how involved the author gets to be in the translation, how maybe annoying can get by not letting maybe which is also the job of the translator probably to make these choices.
So how involved does the author get in the translation process? Yeah? Okay, so that's the question. So I guess that's between the two of you.
Cool. Well, I don't speak French, so I have no idea what I just heard. But um, but the one thing that I thought was amazing listening to it was that even though I couldn't understand, I knew exactly what was happening. The rhythm was still completely there. And so that moment was just like completely cleanly translated in terms of like the just purely that rhythmic feeling, which is incredible. And so, yeah, I mean, I very much, and I think that this is generally the understanding that the translator has that authority and that, the author shouldn't get too involved unless there's kind of genuine queries that are had. I looked at the book before it went to print to look at the form because that is something that's a bit harder for someone to kind of fact check or, because it's a system that I've devised on the page. So yeah, I'm kind of the only person who can say, yeah, you've done it. And the answer was, yeah, you've done it. So yeah, I was very much hands off. But it seems like Julia's done an amazing job.
Julia, that was one of the questions I was burning to ask you. I was hoping someone in the audience would bring up the translation. What was it like to translate this book? What was your experience of it? How was it different to other translations you've done?
Yeah, obviously it was different, but it was very interesting in that the reason why I'm doing translation is because I love the exercise. And this is true for every book that I've translated. I think that translation is a wonderful sport for your mind and everything. And as I've always been between the English language and the French one, uh, writing translation is really keeping me in shape, actually. Well, my spoken English may not show it. So it is really interesting for me to face the challenge of translating. And with Rebecca's, it was especially interesting because when Joachim, the editor, sent me the book, I just flew through it and I was like, oh, this is going to be simple. This doesn't have many words. And then it was so interesting because that was just what you were saying was the more I was translating, the more I wondered, why did you choose this form, shape, and how the fuck did you do it? Because it looks like chaotic, but you have to be pretty smart to, master chaos. So this is not chaotic at all. Actually, to do this, to get out of the classical form of the novel, you have to be, yeah, pretty smart to do that. So I felt like I was digging and digging into something and starting to understand it the more I went through it. And what I loved was, well, first it was, yeah, the way it was put on the page, which reminded me of when I was doing slam poetry, actually, because we were doing some of word pen and everything. And this is something that you use with the way you have put sentences, like it's something like that. It's like playing words, but also it reminded me of, I don't know, Gertrude Stein. We were talking about Joyce, but it reminded me of Gertrude Stein. And also there was something that has to do with talkativity. I don't know if that's the right word, but there is this writer called Karl Ove Knausgaard, who's I think Swedish or Norwegian, and who has written books like that where he is giving every detail of his life. It's called
My
My
struggle.
Struggle. Yes, I love it. And he's giving every detail, and also of his life as a father. And this is it. What you were saying about giving every detail of a day, I was really like, I was diving into it, and I was like, yeah, this is the right way to say what a day is like. And there was also something, and I think you did it on purpose, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Something that has to do with femininity and everything that is going on today. That what is being a woman. I always feel like the literature is full of men. It's like really like it's a cellar full of men everywhere telling their own stories. And I really think as a writer, I really feel like we women have to build a women literature. And this is what you have done there, I think. That is, it's everything a woman is thinking, and we never hear about that. What is a day in the skin of a woman? No one tells us about that. So that's why uh, many other things, among many other things, why it was so interesting to translate your book.
It's so nice to hear. Thank you.
Okay, I think Cécile had a question. Did you want to ask? Oh, right. Sorry. I said Alison Anderson before, but she did My Devotion. It was Ruth Driver who did Diver. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I mixed up My Devotion and Respectable Occupation. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Other questions then? I mean, I'd love to follow up with this question of a woman's literature, which I feel that I have to put between quotation marks, and ask. Well, so Woolf, to come back to Woolf, wrote famously that women write with what she called a difference of view. That's something that you see quite a lot in Woolfian criticism. This idea that women just have a different perspective on the world, and that it's not as not to say that they all have the same perspective, but that as a woman, no matter what kind of woman you are, you come to the world with you kind of see it aslant, perhaps because the world is constructed by and for men. And perhaps that's changing, but I wonder how Rebecca or Julia, how you see your work, perhaps as in the dans la lignée, like in the heritage and the tradition of women who've written before you. Maybe we'll start with Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a really interesting space, like writing as a woman. I think this taps into what Julia was just talking about. That day in the life is so much about what it is to be a woman, and you hear that in the extract that Olivia read about, nice shoes. Like he's just saying nice shoes, isn't he? And there's kind of space of nuance where, as particularly as a young woman, like how do you interpret these things? How do you assess those kind of spaces of ambiguity that are particular to being a woman, to being an object, to learning from a young age that you are being looked at, and kind of having that ways of seeing-esque delay of I'm actually having a real ways of seeing-esque experience here, because I have like two cameras, so I can see my face here, and then I see you guys as well, and I see myself like at the edge of the room as I'm taught to as a woman. So it's a real, emphasized moment. But yeah, so this kind of space of kind of confusion that I think you start thinking about as a teenage girl, and you never really stop thinking about it, these spaces of, consent, of objectification. And I think that is a particular thing to the gender. I kind of think that it's, I don't know, I think that it's a pain in the ass to deal with, but it's really interesting for writing. So if you can use that and actually in some way benefit off a space that is irritating to be part of, then ideal. And I think, like that is a kind of, I mean, I think, the male desire needs to be written more of, and needs to be a space that is explored more of. But I think at the moment there is a great kind of host of women who are writing within this kind of strange, nuanced, ambiguous space.
Yeah, Julia, how about you?
Yeah. I really don't want to make it a war, because we have had some really bellicose times lately, at least in France, about that. But I think it is a really interesting story to tell. What women have to say now that we are sort of allowed to talk. And there are many things to say about that. There is Kate Millet's book about, I don't know, what's the English title? It's about how men writers write about women in books, like Henry Miller. When I grew up as a teenager, I thought that every sexual encounter um, um, needed like a, how do you call that, garter belt or something. Like in Harry Miller, every woman is available and obviously horny, and I didn't feel like that every day, you know. So I was like, being an adult is going to be very, very demanding. So I think because of that, I think it's really interesting that we young women feel more allowed. And here it's about giving ourselves the right to write about the reality, write about our point of view, and show what it's like to be a woman, because this is what it is about. Obviously, everything about the male gaze, everything about patriarchy, the hell of it, is about men not knowing what it is to be a woman. And there is this, I think, American novelist named R.O. Kwon, if I just say it right, who has written a book, I think, entitled "The Fires," maybe, and she wrote an article in a piece in a Paris Review where she is listing all the things that you do as a woman through the day not to get attacked. And when you read it as a woman, you know every one of them. Yeah, you write on the side of the pavement that has the light, and you always hold your keys when you're in a car park, and you make fake phone calls. She says, I made more fake phone calls than actual phone calls, and I really, yeah, I connect to that. And I read that to my boyfriend, and you can do the test with yours, and guys are like, really? You do that every day? Yeah. When I get up in a car, I always look, in the back seat. If there's someone, I look under my bed in every hotel room I've been since I'm like 15 years old. And this is, well, okay, maybe I'm paranoid about the hotel rooms, but I've been attacked, and now I'm looking everywhere because before I just sit my butt somewhere. So this is about that, and I think as much as we have been fascinating by the representation that man has given the humanity of what life is for the last 15 centuries, it might be very interesting to have the view of the women about that, and the way we circulate through hardships and experience. And why is there no book about a real novel, real adventure novel about pregnancy and birth?
Ah, well, there you go. You're going to write
Come
it.
on.
Rebecca's going to write it when she gets
What
there.
is more rock and
We'll all
roll
write
than
it.
this birth?
Thank you so much, Julia. That is a strong stance. And thank you for articulating it. And thank
And a
you,
fresh
Rebecca, for
voice.
both of you are so fresh and so strong. And I'm so glad to have been able to talk to both of you, especially across the wires to Nantes and then here in person in London. It's been wonderful. So thank you again for coming. Yeah. Oh, very, very quick, because I think we have to wrap it up. That's the, yeah.
Some men can say nice suit with no other thinking that to do a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's
But it was very well right. I think that your writing is very good, and it's opening for me some interrogation, because it's true that the way to see that is very interesting, and I take the point that a lot of opportunity could be shocking, but also sometimes can be really nice.
sure, but
But I don't know how we can relate to
that moment is talking about exactly that, the fact that two simple words, nice shoes, can both mean nice shoes and can also mean the complete opposite. It can mean, hi, can I take your attention? I want to say that I'm noticing you, I'm looking at your body. And that's the kind of space I'm interested in when I'm writing Little Scratch, is the fact that sometimes those simple moments that are also fine are used as a cover. And it's very difficult. And this is kind of the space that, women writers I think are starting to talk about now, is that we're very good at drawing lines and talking about kind of consent and assault as either the one thing or not. And there is this kind of space beyond that where behavior can be inappropriate, even though it's not obviously inappropriate, and intention exists kind of separate to action. And so you can do exactly the same thing as someone who means well or is doing well and actually be doing something intentionally kind of manipulative or difficult.
And then claim that you weren't doing anything of
I
the
was
sort
just-
just
I
by
was just saying you had
gaslighting.
nice
Yeah,
shoes.
everything's fine. Nice shoes.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so I think we'll be around. Maybe we can have a chit chat afterwards and catch up one-on-one. But thank you again for your question. Thank you all for coming. It's been lovely. Thank you for having us. Have a lovely evening.